I just want the US Open to be better. I want it to be a better event. I love sitting in the after action report where we went through 585 line items of things we want to do better next year. Because I see all those things and I want to be a part of making every one of those million fans who comes through the door or another, millions more who watch it at home.
Alex Eala is officially in the main draw of the US Open. The US Open tournament director Alex Butoric confirmed it this week. And while on paper this is simply a matter of ranking, insiders close to the tournament are reportedly framing it as something much bigger than a routine entry. According to Alex Butoric, the US Open is not just about giving Eala a spot to compete. It is reportedly being viewed internally as a chance to pull in millions of new eyes on the tournament, at a moment when tennis is desperately trying to widen its audience beyond the usual crowd. Tournament director has reportedly pointed to Eala specifically as the kind of player who can bring in a demographic the sport has struggled to reach for years. And that alone tells you how seriously this is being taken behind the scenes. Alex Butoric have reportedly indicated that the US Open wants to take its global reach to the next level, and that Eala's presence in the draw is one piece of a bigger strategy to make that happen. It is not just about ticket sales in Flushing Meadows. It is about streaming numbers, social media engagement, and a new wave of fans who may have never watched a full tennis match in their lives, but will tune in because of who Eala is and what she represents. That is reportedly the calculation being made right now by people who have a direct hand in how this tournament is put together. And that brings up the part of this story that has people talking the most. According to Butoric, there is real discussion happening around scheduling, and specifically around where and when Eala's matches will be placed. The suggestion floating around is that tournament organizers could look to give her primetime slots on one of the show courts, the kind of placement that guarantees maximum eyes, maximum noise, and maximum attention. If that happens, it would not be subtle.
What fans want to see, not only in Arthur Ashe Stadium, but out on court 14 versus who needs a certain player to play early because they're going to be on in Tokyo versus someone who needs to be later because they need to be in Australia, and really figure out how to make that puzzle work every single day.
It would be a clear signal that the US Open is willing to do whatever it takes to give its fans, new and old, the kind of moment that gets people talking for days. And if the last few months are anything to go by, that moment would not just be hype, it would deliver. This is the kind of decision that goes far beyond a single match on a single night. Scheduling at a Grand Slam is one of the most closely guarded pieces of strategy any tournament has. Every session on the show courts is a chance to sell tickets, drive streaming numbers, and shape the story the entire event tells for that day. Handing a player a primetime slot is essentially a bet, a statement that organizers believe that player can carry the attention of an entire evening session. Get it wrong, and you are left with a half-empty stadium and a flat broadcast. Get it right, and you can define the entire tournament's narrative for the next 2 weeks. The fact that Eala is reportedly even part of that conversation says a lot about how far her stock has risen in just a matter of months.
We need to keep something that is accessible for the fan to still come and experience the US Opens. So it's hard because, like you said, that there is so much demand. And there's times where, the brokers will buy up all the inventory.
Because this has already happened once this year, and it worked spectacularly. Wimbledon made the call to put Alex Eala against Iga Swiatek, the defending champion, on one of the biggest stages of the tournament. On paper, it looked like a mismatch. Swiatek was the champion. Eala was the underdog making a run nobody outside the Philippines was fully paying attention to yet. But tennis does not always follow the script, and this was one of those days. Eala took the first set in a brutal tiebreak, saving set points along the way, and then closed it out in the second to send Swiatek out of the tournament. The stadium was full. Thousands more fans were reportedly stuck outside, unable to get in, just hoping to catch a glimpse of the scoreboard or hear the roar from inside. When Eala won, the reaction inside that stadium was the kind of moment broadcasters dream about. It was raw, it was loud, and it turned into one of the defining images of this year's tournament. That win did more than just get Eala into the second week of a major for the first time. It turned her into appointment viewing. The match reportedly became one of the most talked about of the entire tournament, dominating tennis conversation across social media for days afterward, in a way that very few matches outside of the finals typically manage. People who had never followed Eala's career before suddenly knew her name. Highlight clips of that tiebreak circulated everywhere. What Wimbledon did by placing her on that court paid off far beyond what anyone could have predicted. And now other tournaments are reportedly taking notice of exactly what that kind of placement can do for viewership and buzz. Think about what actually happened there for a second. This was not a scheduled showdown between two established stars that everyone expected to be must-watch television from the moment the draw came out. This was a rising player up against the defending champion. On paper, a straightforward routine win for the favorite. Instead, it turned into one of the signature upsets of the entire fortnight, the kind of match that gets replayed in highlight reels for years. That is exactly the sort of unpredictability that makes tennis compelling, and it is exactly why tournaments are reportedly starting to see the value in putting players like Eala in front of the biggest possible audience, rather than tucking them away on an outside court where casual fans would never stumble across them. That win also set off what can only be described as Eala mania. Once she got past Swiatek, every single one of her remaining matches at Wimbledon reportedly sold out. Fans who had barely known who she was 2 weeks earlier were suddenly building their entire day around catching her on court. It became less about tennis fundamentals for a lot of these new fans, and more about being part of something. Nobody wanted to miss the next chapter, and Wimbledon was not an isolated case. Go back to the Australian Open earlier this year, and you can see the same pattern starting to form. Eala's matches there consistently drew bigger and more engaged crowds than her ranking alone would typically suggest, with fans showing up specifically to see her rather than simply catching whichever match happened to be scheduled on a given court. That kind of drawing power, appearing across multiple tournaments and multiple surfaces, is exactly why organizers are reportedly paying closer attention to her scheduling now. It is not a one-off, it is a pattern, and patterns are what tournament directors build strategies around. The knock-on effect of all this has been just as telling. Wherever Eala has played this year, demand for tickets has reportedly spiked, and in some cases, so has pricing. Matches involving her have become some of the more expensive tickets to secure at the events she has featured in, driven purely by fans wanting to be in the building for whatever happens next. That is not something that happens around a player just because they are ranked inside the top 30. That happens because a player has become a must-watch attraction, the kind of name that changes how an entire session sells. So when you put all of that together, it is not hard to see why the US Open would want a piece of this. Eala is not just another entrant in the draw this year. She is someone who has already proven, on the biggest stage in the sport, that she can deliver a signature moment that dominates the conversation and pulls in fans who would otherwise have no reason to tune in. Wimbledon got the payoff once already. Now the question is whether the US Open is willing to make the same bet. And if the scheduling whispers are accurate, it very much sounds like they are. If Eala does end up with a primetime slot on one of the main courts in New York, do not be surprised if this turns into one of the most talked about storylines of the entire tournament. She has shown, over and over again this year, that when the moment is big enough, she rises to meet it. And if that happens again on a stage as massive as the US Open, this will not just be a great story for Philippine tennis. It will be a moment that reshapes how the sport thinks about building new fans going forward. That is where things stand right now. Eala is in the main draw. The buzz around her placement is already building, and if history from this year is any indication, this is a storyline worth watching closely in the weeks ahead.